Hello, dear viewers. As promised in the past, we want to have some discussion about the Tajiks, about their ethnogenesis, and also some other aspects about Tajik nation in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia, and also western parts of China. So Tajik nation is a big nation scattered over 5-6 countries. It is important to know that who are Tajiks. So in this regard, my guest is Akhundzada Aref Hasan Khan, who is a researcher in this area. And firstly, I welcome him. And then I say that I ask him that if he can start by saying, by explaining who are Tajiks. Hello.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ansari, for inviting me once again and asking me to participate in a discussion with you. It is always very useful for me to exchange views with you and also to get my own views across. Actually, the subject of Tajiks is one that has unfortunately been neglected by many specialists and even prominent ethnogeneticists in the past. There is no doubt that the Tajiks are part of the larger Iran Shahr, or the larger formation of the Iranian ethnocultural matrix as it existed before the days of Islam, in the days of the Persian Empire, which existed for a very long time, 1100 years. There were 3 empires, Achaemenian, Parthian, and Sasanian, which existed before Islam, and they laid a very firm foundation. The whole area which was governed by the Persian Empire stretched right from Kashgar in China up to Thrace in the eastern Greek Mediterranean region. And, it covered Anatolia and all these areas right up to the river Indus. So we are part of a huge agglomeration of cultural entities which are very similar to each other. There are differentiations between them. To make it brief, many people have described, called them Tajiks as an appendage of the Persian entity per se. The Persian language has originated in Faras, and because the Persian Empire took its name from the fact that it was ruled from the province of Fars. But we must remember that Tajik, the area that is described as Tajik, or that of Khurasan, in the old days, it consisted of Bactria, Sogdia, these provinces of the Persian Empire, and many others lower down, such as Gedrosia, Narakosia. And what we are dealing with basically up in this area, we are dealing with the Bactrian and the Sogdian. We must also remember that Persian language, modern Persian, the modern Farsi that we recognize nowadays, was introduced here by the Samanis. That is a recorded fact. That is why modern Tajikistan recognizes the Samanids or the Samanis as the first Tajik rulers who are Muslim and Iranian, both of them. However, there are many aspects from in Tajik culture which you can say that were retained from the ancient formations of Bactria and Sogdia, Bakhtar and Sogd. and they still affect the Tajik milieu or the Tajik context in a very strong manner, albeit they have vanished. Bactrian language, the Arya language that was spoken in Bactria language, it vanished 1,000 years ago, at the same time that modern Persian was being introduced into this area. And similarly, the Sogdians are no longer in their original shape. The Yaghnobi language, which is spoken in Tajikistan now by a minority of 5,000 people, is believed to be a remnant of the original Sogdian language that was spoken. There are many other languages in Tajikistan that are now, by modern Tajik ethnologists, they are regarded as Tajik languages, say like Roshani, Shoghnani, or Shoghni, Wakhi, Sanglichi, Ishkashmi. There are languages such as Munji, Yidgha. They've been classified by ethnologists, and I mean, the language of Wakhi, for example, is a language that many ethnologists characterize as Eastern Iranian and being related to the major Eastern Iranian language, which is Pashto. Although it would be an anathema for many people if I were to say that describe Pashtuns as Tajiks. Perhaps they are not Tajiks in the way we think of them. I don't think of them as Tajiks in that sense. But modern scholars in Tajikistan are exploring the possibility that because Pashto is related to the Pamiri languages, it is in fact described as the largest Pamiri language. They are coming around to even classifying that as a Tajik language, although at the moment it is separate, and no Pashtun would regard himself as Tajik at the moment. So what I meant to say was that although we are the successors to Persian and we do proudly associate ourselves with the Persian identity, our ancestors spoke Gabri Persian, which was Zoroastrian Dari, and they also spoke an early form of Dari. And we can't disassociate ourselves from that language. But what we are talking about is to accommodate, other languages such as Roshani and Shoghni, which have been accommodated. We're exploring the possibility whether Pashto is a Saka language. Saka is Scythian or Scythian language, which originated when the Sakas came. They were pushed out of the eastern part of China. Kashgar, the western part of China, sorry. And they were pushed out and they came to Bactria. From Bactria, they came to Gandhara. Then they came to the greater Paktia region, which is where Pashtun ethnogenesis started. And they also went to the Sistan region, which is where the Afghan ethnogenesis began, the Pashtun Afghan. The commonality between these, this is what my investigations say, this is my own idea, that the commonality between Pashtun and Afghan, I mean, you will notice that Pashto speakers employ both terms to describe themselves, and yet they are not sure why there is a duality of terms, and they are not sure why as to the origin of these terms. But Afghan is a term which originated in Armenia. It is a Parthian-related term, which is found in Sistan. And Pashtun is a Dardic-related term which is found in Paktia, or the Pakta Dards, which were mentioned in the Rig Veda and by Herodotus as the Paktians, or the Paktuans, or the inhabitants of the Paktuik country, which lay to the west of Gandhara, to the southwest. So these gave rise to distinct formations within the Pashtun-Afghan ethnogenetic structure.
Akhundzada sir, and here's one question.
Yes.
Some people, they think that, and it causes confusion. Some people say Orientalists, that Tajiks have been those Muslims who came by Arab invasion of the area. They settled here, and when they left, I mean Arabs and Turks came. So then Turks, to distinguish themselves from non-Turks, they called them Tajik. So inside so Tajik is like an envelope which contains Arabs, non-Arabs, non-Turkish people. So what do you think about this?
Exactly. What I think is that the term Tajik appeared for the first time in, I think, the 13th century AD, around about the year 1275. It definitely is an invention of the Muslim times. This term that is used to describe Eastern Iranians or Eastern Persians was not there in the time of the Persian Empire. In fact, the people here that were described were mostly called Dehqan, because they belong to that category of Persian nobility, which existed, it is documented as existing in the Sasanian times. Your contention is correct. Many people have theorized, people say that the term Tajik is derived from Taj, which means ruler. Although that term is also correct, because Tajiks in this part of the world were basically a ruling class. They were not subservient. In Gandhara, they were the rulers, whereas the population of Gandhara was Indic. They were Hinkis, they were artisans, they were not rulers. They were businessmen and artisans. As far as the other probability of the term, the origin of the term Tajik, many, I think personally, that it originated from the Persian term Tazi, which is used for Arabs, Tazi or Taji, which was a term used by the Persians for Arabs when they came in the beginning. And you will know that many of our investigations have revealed, and every Iranologist knows, that the Persians took very long to convert to Islam, and there were many Persians around for 200 years or 300 years even after the invasion of Hazrat Umar in Persia. They paid jizya to continue practicing their religion, and they were called by the Arabs as Gabarian or Gabari, or it was a sort of a funny name for them, a sort of abusive name, a derisive name, saying that these are Gabris, these are people who still believe in Majusi or the Zartashti, mazhab. So what I think is that Tajik is a Muslim.
Zada sir,
yes.
There is also another reference that Chinese traveler before Islam, he traveled through India, Afghanistan, and Central Asia, and he found that
Yes.
there is a tribe called Tahu, something like that, and some researchers, they refer that name to Tajik. So they bring this discourse of Tajik origin back, to before Islam. So
well, exactly. You're talking about Huanzhong. He visited this area, Gandhara and India and Bactria, in 632, right at the time that our Holy Prophet was, the year in which he died. And then 10 years later, Hazrat Umar, the Caliph, the third Khalifa Rashid, he invaded, Iran at that time.
Khasad.
Aji.
Yeah, please.
According to, Huanzhong came here to Peshawar also. At that time, the Hindus were ruling this area. There was a Hindu king in Kapisa. There was a Hindu ruler in Laghman and in Peshawar. Peshawar had been devastated by the Huns in those days. So Peshawar was what they call a Viran area. It was absolutely devastated and laid waste. So yes, there are many references that Huanzhong wrote in his diary of his travels, which scholars now, especially the people, the nationalists, would like to relate to the term Tajik. As you said, he had mentioned the term that there were some people living. He had mentioned Afghans as Apakan or Apokian, but I don't think that the term Tajik was around in those days. They were all Persians. As far as I'm concerned, there were Deccans in this area. There were Deccans from very ancient times. I mean, in our area, the Swatis, for example, have a tradition of, ascribing their descent to Sikandar Zulqarnain, who was scholars have identified as Cyrus the Great. So it means that we were in this area from a very long time, from about 1,000 years before Huanzong came from China and he visited this place. We were already a very ancient people and we were ruling this place, because it is known that Gandhara was a satrapy of the Persian Empire, just as Bactria was. In fact, these were very important satrapies. Bactria was so important that the Achaemenians sent their cousin royal family to, a member of the Achaemenian royal family was the satrap of Bactria. And similarly, Gandhara was a sort of extension of Bactria. It was an attachment, the same culture, the same Buddhist civilization. And, so I believe that the context, the matrix that we are talking about existed from a long time. It was there from a long time.
Another thing that you referred was Dagon and Dehqan. And also, if you see the memoir of Babur Shah, he refers to Tajik and also to Sart, something. So how you relate these things and at that time?
Well, Sart is generally considered to be Turks who came and settled in the cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, Marawa, and they started speaking Persian language, and they started taking, changing from their nomadic lifestyle into a urban lifestyle. They became shopkeepers, businessmen, and Hunarmand artisans, and they started living a settled life in the cities, and they spoke Persian. Sarts were those people, basically, from what I know. And they joined in the Tajik population, although they were, they were Turks in origin. So nowadays you will find many Tajiks with the name Beg or Bek, which is basically a Turkish name. Similarly, I mean, people here even use the term Khan, which is a Turkish term, basically. So this mixing of Turco-Iranian in Central Asia became standard later on. I mean, now it's very hard to separate, the Turks, they adopted Persian culture because it was superior. They adopted many terms from the Persian language, although they retained their Turkish identity. If you look at it, the same thing took place in Iran, where, where many Turks, after the time of Islam, from the Ghaznavids, and then after the Ilkhanids of the Mongol, after Changiz invasion, and then after that the Akkayunli, Qarakayunli, Afshar, Qachar, these people were basically Turks who ruled Iran. So I mean, the whole history of Central Asia is Turco-Iranian. The Iranian matrix remained only in Tajikistan, the dominant part of it. I mean, the dominant.
One question is here that we talked about the name of the Tajik, the origin, and also what do we mean about Tajik, but about the ethnogenesis of Tajiks. Can we say that Tajik is a pure race by genetic, or its construction is based on culture, language, tradition, and the lifestyle they have?
Well, basically, I think there is no such thing as a pure race as far as genetics is concerned. In every social formation that is characterized by a single ethnonym, ethnonym means an ethnic name such as, Arab or Tajik or Persian or Turk, you find several different genetic lines. That is normal. You find several different genetic groups, patrilineal lines that they say, Silsilahaye Pidari. you find. But so I would say that the standard definition of regarding Tajiks as a nation, as a culture, is the language that they speak and a certain culture that they follow, cultural identity. There are many people of different backgrounds in this, in every culture. Even I would say the same is regarding Pashtun culture, that the only fact that they are called Pashtun is the language, although now Pashtuns tended to retain their identity more strongly than Tajiks, because Tajiks are an urban people. For them, ethnic lineage didn't matter as much as it did for tribal people. Although in our area, the Khan families still maintain their shajaras zealously, because they are basically clan or tribal-based people. I mean, they are not used to living in the cities. They are village people who own land, and so in the same manner, they have kept their shajaras. They have maintained them, and you can say that the patrilineal, aspect of it is still very strong. Although even among people like Swatis, for example, in Pakistan, you can find 5 or 6 different paternal lines within the Swati formations, social formations. Yes.
Okay, so now coming to the Swati, you mentioned about Swati Tajiks. Why they have been called Gabari or Gabar, and this name was, like you said, it could be a word of contempt to Tajiks by others, but later on, was it acceptable for Swati Tajiks to be called Gabar?
Definitely, even now, the major tribal section in the Swati Tajiks is known as Gabari, and they've proudly preserved the name, even though it was a label given to them by the Arabs, because I think they converted late, or I mean, those Muslims who converted earlier were known as Tazian by the locals. They are Tazian as opposed to us Gabarian. So I think there was a rivalry between them for a long time, which existed in the early part of the Muslim rule in this area, say the first 200 or 300 years. I think personally, according to the evidence that we have collected, the Swatis converted to Islam sometime around the 9th century or the 10th century. They converted under Mahmud Ghaznavi to Islam. And before that, they followed a mixture of Zoroastrianism and Hinduism, like the Ghauris did. For example, you will know about the Ghaurian, that they were actually Suriyan. And Shahabuddin Ghauri had a great-grandfather who was called Muhammad ibn Suri, but actually he was a Hindu. He only took the name Muhammad ibn Suri to please the Caliph of Baghdad, the Abbasid Caliph, who was giving him, a sort of, in a relationship with him, who was giving him favor and who was giving him protection. But actually, secretly, he practiced Hinduism. He was known to have practiced Hinduism. It was only his son who was defeated by the Ghaznavi Sultan Bahram Shah, who was the grandson of Sultan Mahmud. He defeated this person, and he took poison afterwards and committed suicide. So his body was burnt according to the Hindu tradition. So there were people around at that time. After the invasion of Islam in Persia, in Eastern Persia, what happened was that Islam didn't reach. It reached a few areas of Sistan, such as Bust and Zaranj, but it did not control the whole of Sistan. And you will know that there were people called Rotabila, the Rutbils or the Zunbils, who were the rulers of Sistan. There is one author, Muhammad Akhtar, who has described the Rutbils as being the ancestors of the Swatis. But that is a separate subject, but we have found evidence for it because my own genetic group has evolved for 7,000 years. It has never left Sistan. From Sistan, it has migrated north to Balkh, and from Balkh, it has migrated to the surrounding areas of Gandhara, Peshawar, Swat, etc. However, what I wanted to say was that in those days, the Rutbils who were described by the Arabs, were also known as Iranians who were practicing Hinduism. Just as the Gharis, the Suris, were themselves Parthians, because Suri is a Parthian name from Suran Pahlav or Suran Pahlawan. So they were the rulers of Sistan. Many people think that they were the people who were described in the Shahnama as, you know, the Pahlavans, Zal and Rustam and Sohrab, etc. So what I was saying was that they were in the time that after Islam invaded Persia and took part of the western part of Persia, Khorasan was ruled for 350 years by Rajput Hindus, what you call the Kabul Shahan or the Hindu Shahan. For a total of 300 years, they ruled Kabul and Zabulistan until Yaqub Ilayth, who was the first Iranian Muslim ruler, Yaqub Ilayth Safari. He invaded Kabul in 871 and he defeated the last Kabul Shah. So the last Kabul Shah fled east to Hund in Sawabi district, which is in Gandhara. And he established a new capital for himself at Hund, or Chota Lahore, what they call Lahore-e-Kuchak. And afterwards, he was killed by his own minister, Kalar, who was a Brahmin. So Kalar established the Hindu Shahi dynasty, which ruled for another 150 years till Mahmud of Ghazni came and defeated the last king, Jaipal, Sri Jaipal Dev.
Okay.
You know, in Peshawar.
Another question is that do you believe that Tajiks have had a feeling of nationhood in the past? Because the history that we read in the past 1,000 years after Samanian, we don't see any political movement or any government established by Tajiks. So do you believe that Tajiks in the past 1,000 years that we know, you know, since the name emerged in the history, so do you think that any time between now and 1,000 years ago, Tajiks have been organized themselves as a nation and they had the feeling of, I mean, some, you know, some kind of entity
Cohesive nationhood. Yes.
to repulse others,
Yes.
and be very connected among themselves.
You are correct, Dr. Saab. Actually, the Tajiks, I don't think they ever had a cohesive view of nationhood as it is recognized in modern terms. However, they were connected by culture and by language. There was, you know, their Pehchan-e-Bahimi, or, you know, among each other, they recognized each other as belonging to the same cultural or ethnic matrix. However, there was nothing political to define them as a nation until I think the Soviet Union did it for them in 1929. Although we find several rulers like the Gharis, for example, we find the Swatis who called themselves as Tajiks. We find even the Kurds in Herat. We find certain other rulers, princelings, who described themselves as Tajiks. But there was no Tajik state of the kind that you talk about, that you just mentioned, either in Khorasan or in any other part of the Iran share.
Okay, now
I don't think so. That is what.
Yeah, thank you. You know, now we see some kind of revival in Pakistan and also Afghanistan, similarly in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and some parts of China, that people who have this title of Tajik ethnically, so they want something different from the past. So
definitely.
So what do you think that, is there any chance that Tajik nation state can be designed or think about?
What I see is during the past 5 years or so, we have seen a revival of Tajiks all over the place, all over this area. We have seen our work to revive the Swati name and to bring it to the public discourse. We have seen the Tajiks in Khurasan in Afghanistan stand up for themselves against Afghani fascism and to define their own identity. We have seen the Tajiks in Bukhara and Samarkand mention how the Uzbeks have usurped the heritage, especially the two great cities of Bukhara and Samarkand. We find the Sarkuli Tajiks in China also, who are anxious about their identity. What happened was in the past that the big powers like England and Russia have always determined the drawing of borders in this region, even the borders of Afghanistan. The name of Afghanistan was given to Afghanistan by the British, and then later the Russians accepted it by mutual consent. So what we find is that the old Anglo-American order, which has dominated the world, for its own greedy commercial purposes and which did not take history into regard, that is passing away, and many of its constructs, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, they are now in danger of collapse. Because they could not be maintained without Western aid or Western help. America has, after the 15th of August last year, America has fled from this region and it has not looked back again. So this region is now open to new influences. We hope that the Russians in the past, they gave the Tajiks an identity in the form of Tajikistan. China has also treated its Sarkuli minority very well. We hope that to redefine Pushtun, so-called Pushtun history in this area as not only Pushtun, but an Eastern Iranian history that is related to the larger context of Khurasan, so that we can accommodate the Pushtuns as, an Eastern Iranian component. For till now, the Pushtuns have been wanting their own separate identity, but they have failed to establish it because of their own tribal nature. Pushtuns will have to reform themselves and have to reform their outlook if they want to exist as a modern nation. They will also have to redefine their roots as to who they are within the Iranian nation. Many of them don't know or appreciate even the term Iranian, that they are Iranians basically, or that their language, Pushto, is an Iranian language derived from the Saka Scythians. So along with that, the Tajiks are also seeking to enrich their identity by identifying which people are the part of the Tajik nation, such as the Swatis, such as the Sarkulis, such as the Roshanis, the Shugnanis, the many other people. Tomorrow we could even define Pushtun as a subset of the Tajik nation, of the eastern part of Iran, or Khurasan, which is a very long-standing historical identity and which is still very much valid and appreciated by all the people. Even Ahmad Shah Abdali, when he founded his new state after the murder of his king, Nadir Shah Afshar, he never called it Afghanistan, he called it Khurasan. And it was only the British in the 1840s, around the time of the First Anglo-Afghan War, that they started referring to this country as Afghanistan in their correspondence, and that is where the name originated.
And, referring to your last point, I was reading a book, around 1840s, north of Afghanistan was called Turkestan.
Yes, what the Turks, they call Gune, Turkestan. Rashid Dostum is mentioning it as southern Turkestan. That is a part of, actually, the reason for that is because the province of Turkestan, which the Russians overtook, which contained the Emirate of Bukhara and the Khanate of Kokand and many other places, the Emirate of Badakhshan even, and places like, Qatahan and Khulm, etc.
Yeah.
They were all little emirates within the huge province of Turkestan. So when the Russians overtook it, the Tsarist Russians, they preferred to call it Turkestan because the Turks dominated it. Out of the many Central Asian states, only the Tajiks are Iranian. The rest, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, they're all Turks, you see. Uzbekistan is also Turk. So that is due to that they called it Turkestan. I think otherwise these areas are all, these are all Khorasan. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the real name is, the historic name is Khorasan.
Yes.
But
when,
you know, Muhammad Shibani, the Uzbek, he took Central Asia and then took north of Afghanistan. So Russian people, Russian Orientalists,
basically, I think
they call it Turkish.
What happened was exactly what you were correct. Shebani Khan was the uncle of Babur and he defeated Babur. Babur was a Temuri Turk. And after the Temuri invasion of India and the Temuri invasion of Khorasan, this whole Tajik identity was given a big blow. Our Swati Tajiks were defeated by Babur by the same context. So I think for the first 500 years, we have been defeated by the Turks and we need to regain our identity now.
I just wanted to say that British Raj, when they called Afghanistan at the beginning, they would mean the south of Hindu Kush, because north of Hindu Kush was called Turkestan, and those Uzbek Begs and Mirs, they were running Afghanistan.
Yes.
So one question.
What happened was,
yes.
What I'd like to elaborate in this regard is that the British took what they found here. The British were not interested in reform. They were what Napoleon called a shopkeeper, a mercantile empire. They just wanted to defend their money-making interests in this area, their mercantile and their corporate interests. So they decided to take and enforce whatever they found. And for the Russians who were coming from the other direction, they were threatening the British interests. So that is what the British were preoccupied with. So I think the British did a great injustice. They destroyed Swati identity. They falsified, they helped in the falsification of our history. Most of the Pashtun Khans of Peshawar Valley, they were ardent servants of the British. They helped the British. They served the British. They were given awards, khitabat, khilat by the British. So the British just took what they found. The British took over from the Turks, basically from the Mughal statehood, because after the Mughals came the Duranis, after the Duranis came the Sikhs, but they continued the Turkish ways.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the British just took that. So we will have to, explain all those issues.
Okay, one question is that, do you believe that Tajiks in this region, they should be in one country or they should stay in these different countries, but continue their political leverage and keep their identity alive and their culture, their language, and also continue to have some relationship? So what is your idea in this regard?
Well, at the moment, we will have to continue separately in whichever country we're living in. But as I said earlier, the countries that exist already in this region, like Pakistan and Afghanistan, basically they were British creations. And since British and their American successors have withdrawn from this region, and the Russians and the Chinese are coming, we are bound to see a reshaping of this area. The old borders that were drawn, they were wrongly drawn. They were drawn on the basis of, imperial influence, spheres of influence, rather than to define an ethnic reality. So I personally believe that Pakistan and Afghanistan, to put it in simple words, they will not exist as they are in the present shape, because these are unstable structures. And the British and the Americans maintain them for their own interests. But since those interests are now obsolete, they are bankrupt, they are finished, we will have to now redefine this area. And among that, we will have one of the core redefinitions is that of the Tajiks, whether they they will definitely merit a single state. I believe that all Tajiks should be living in a single state, whether they are living in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan.
There is Akhundzada. like foreign minister or state minister of USA said that we don't allow changes in the international borders. Like there is a threat of Russia on Ukraine, and apparently they claim, at least in the Western media, that Russia has claim over the territorial claim in Ukraine, but Western countries, on top of them, USA, says that it is unacceptable to change the existing international borders. So when you say that one nation for Tajiks, so it will demolish.
That will be a very later on. That will be very later on. And Sarisa, what's happening now is that I foresee a war coming. America is now, instead of this area, it is concentrating on the Ukraine. Of course, it will say that it will say that changing of borders is unacceptable, etc. But after the war takes place, God help us all, I think it will be a nuclear war. So we won't be seeing this kind of, America will not have the ability to project its power in this part of. So whether the Tajiks themselves are strong enough to make their own nation, or whether it is made for them by, enabled for them by Russia or China, I do foresee a possibility. The one thing is that American power has declined here, and it is going to decline further.
So one thing,
so whatever America says.
One thing, Akhundzada sir, if suppose Americans are retreating politically and strategically from the region and from the world, and there is a chance to make a nation or a state as Tajikistan, as a greater Tajikistan. So what kind of homework we should have now? I mean, what kind of preparation we should start now, so that at that time, which is coming, we can easily establish a greater Tajikistan?
Well, we should basically start recognizing who we are. We should recognize our heritage and our name. We should start using our name to label ourselves. We should also start acquainting ourselves, those of us who are not acquainted with the history of Iran Shahr, or with the context of Iran Shahr, or the language of Iran Shahr, Farsi. We should start relearning. It is not a difficult thing. The languages that we already speak are already heavily influenced by Farsi. And we should also recognize that the Tajiks are a very diverse nation, contain many, different languages such as Wakhi, Roshani, Shughni, and local languages. So we should start diversifying. I mean, the framework is already there, but what we need to do basically is to revive our name and start using it, identifying ourselves by that name. Your voice is not coming.
Sorry, I was saying that you are saying that we should stick to our identity and language, which is Persian or Farsi. What else we should do? So, I mean, this is something internally we can achieve easily, but internationally and also at region level, what kind of, tasks we have in front of us?
Basically, on a simple level, on a very simple level, and I think at the moment, this will be enough for us to start calling ourselves Tajiks and start networking. We have internet, and we have the means to start discussing with each other our history and the moves that we need to make, and looking at international politics, which is changing every day in a dramatic fashion. We should take the chances that are given to us, to sort of recognize ourselves, and also then push for an identity, for a unitary single identity with the name of Tajik.
Okay,
so I think that the chances for that are coming.
Okay, thank you, Akhundzada sir. I think we talk close to 1 hour, just for the sake of our viewers, so
Yes,
that
yes.
they can continue, watching us. I think we can stop now, and we can continue this series. And probably next time we can discuss further about how Tajiks in the region can network, and also what kind of areas we should discuss, and we share our ideas, and how to use this opportunity that we think is coming when the powers, I mean superpowers in the area, are reshaping the politics, and also probably the geography. So that would be for our next discussion. Thank you very much. And at the end, if you have any further or summing up what we discussed, you can, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab, for giving me the opportunity once again. Inshallah, we will have many opportunities to discuss these things. This is a very big subject. We have only begun the journey of 1,000 miles, and I believe we have taken many steps already. And what we need to do, as I said earlier, is to recognize who we are. Basically, our history has been hidden, it has been destroyed. We need to reconstruct that. We need to discuss it. We need to bring it out into the open, and we need to assert our identity under the name and the label of Tajik, whichever country we are in, whether it is Pakistan, Tajikistan, or Afghanistan, and we need to look to the future. So thank you once again for your invaluable, giving me this invaluable chance to discuss with you, and let us hope for the best. And we will, inshallah, we will discuss many, many things in the coming times in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Akhundzada Saab. Khuda Hafiz, and see you next time.
See you next time.